Glad to see you all back in Geneva. My name's Godson. I lead the small sustainability team here at IATA. Basically, if you think about anything that's related to non-CO2, so IENVA, noise, sustainable finance, sustainability reporting, and my favorite subject of all, cabin waste. So clearly, CO2 is our main environmental challenge, but it's not our only environmental challenge. And I'm just going to, actually, I'm going to click a good man, cheers. I'm going to take you through a couple of issues that are associated with sustainable cabin waste, and then my colleague Olga will talk in a moment regarding the challenges that we face with single-use plastics. Okay, so first of all, cabin waste, what is it? So we think about two principal waste streams. One of it is the food and beverage, so untouched, unconsumed, part consumed food and drink and associated packaging. And then we also have a second separate waste stream, which is cleaning waste. So that cleaning waste could be from washrooms, could be from what's picked up on the floor. The audits that we've performed suggest there's about 18% of the overall cabin waste volumes are coming from cleaning waste. The work also suggested, the audits that we performed, 1.43 kilos of waste per passenger. So we extrapolate that through our passenger volumes. Although we saw a fall during the recession and a change in waste type associated with more PPE, more masks associated with that, more packaging, we're seeing that we will be back up to approximately 6 million tons of cabin waste by 2024. Key issue here for us, 20% of the waste, and this has been, other airlines have reported similar figures, 20% of the waste is untouched, unconsumed food and drink. Now, bearing in mind that this year, the estimated market size for in-flight catering is 20 billion, that means we're effectively burning or incinerating $4 billion worth of perfectly good food and drink. We know this is a challenge. 3 years ago, we produced a cabin waste handbook, which identified 23 actions that an airline and service providers can initiate to try and reduce those volumes. So in particular, you can think about things like meal selection at time of check-in, feed before you fly in terms of short haul. So we are aware that we have an internal issue and we're working on that. But airlines around the world also know that we've got a massive external problem. Over the last 20 years, we've seen the introduction of international catering waste rules all around the globe, which effectively preclude us from reusing, recycling, donating, and even bio-treating waste on international flights. When we looked deeper into this, we decided that the first thing we would do a risk assessment. So a risk assessment report was performed 2 or 3 years ago, and it concluded that these waste regulations, there was negligible risk of an airline meal causing an animal health disease. The controls that are put in place are based on controlling 5 diseases. And the premier one there would be foot and mouth disease, but also they have other ones such as classical swine fever. So this is not a human health issue. This is only an animal health issue. So when we start to delve a little bit deeper, we say things like, well, why does the regulation, no scientific justification for milk and dairy products to be classified as biohazardous when they appear in waste? And I'll give you a little bit example of this, and I'll use, I think Olga might be touching on this a little bit later as well. At the Heathrow audit, I met with the animal health regulator, and I asked, can we recycle a paper cup? Completely dry paper cup. The response was, over my dead body. And I said, but why do you feed paper cups to pigs? It doesn't make any sense. This could have contained milk. So the report concludes that in order for a disease to pass through milk, from the premier one here, as I said, foot and mouth disease, in order for it to pass to a pig, it needs to consume 125 liters of contaminated milk. So put that into context, that is 10,416 creamer pots. How on earth, bearing in mind that this has been ultra heat treated, how on earth do we pass disease to a pig? And the other ultimate thing is, how would a pig open it with its trotters anyway? I think that would be a little bit. So we have a completely unrealistic and inappropriate piece of regulation. But the report did highlight one area that we may focus on, and that is the role that passengers may play in the smuggling of meat products. Now, that unfortunately does show a different picture. 2010, a study at Charles de Gaulle suggested up to 3,200 tons of meat was being smuggled in passengers' baggage, of which 287 tons of that is bushmeat. This is coming out of West Africa over a trial period. Similar studies coming out of Switzerland suggesting 1,000 tons of meat is illegally smuggled via Zurich and Geneva airports each year. We really, really need the regulator to start focusing on the true risk and not the perceived risk. We recognize pandemics, whether they're human or animal, are bad for business. So we really need them to get them to focus on that. The two areas that we're working on is in the short term and in the long term. And in the short term, we're trying to work within the regulation to see if we can maximize recycling of the uncontaminated materials. So in January, February next year, we will start a transatlantic trial. So going in both directions using the same recycling and reuse methodologies. 6 airlines have agreed to work with us on this. And bearing in mind, we incinerate waste in Europe coming from the US. The last foot and mouth outbreak disease in the US was 1929. In Canada, it was 1953. Why are we incinerating waste that's coming off these flights? It doesn't make any sense. And a more long-term objective is obviously to see that we are changing the regulations. And what we've done there is we've been looking at creating an EU action group, although clearly during the pandemic, we had a situation where airlines had other things to focus on. When they came back, this is a very high priority. So we collected a group of airlines here, and we produced a joint statement, which is on the IATA website, calling for a review of this particular piece of legislation, which has been cut and paste around the world. Even this week, we've had 2 new airlines and the first airport have agreed to sign up to this statement. And also, what is also looked at is 6 MEPs in the European Parliament raised questions about this regulation in October. We have received a response from the European Commission. The response was, we know that this is a risk. It's a significant risk. And then in the same statement, it says, but we haven't done a risk assessment. So we'd be very happy if we saw the data that would prove that this is a risk. But we haven't got it, and we don't even think the regulator has got it. So we will carry on working with this, and also having to understand that we need to do this beyond Europe now, because this has been promulgated, and certainly we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, it's now taken every South American country as it implemented this legislation. So I think what we really, in conclusion, I think what we want to see is we want facts to be ruling fiction. And I think it's important for us to keep working in this area because the passengers do not understand, and clearly the regulator doesn't understand either. So thank you, and I will now hand over to my colleague Olga, who will talk about the other exciting challenge that we have on single-use plastics. Thanks.
So single-use plastics, essentially plastic products that are that are usable once or over a very short period of time. Thank you. I'm going to speak about our plastic dilemma, which is essentially linked to this single-use plastic casus. So see, on one side, today, airlines need to use single-use plastic. I will explain why. And on the other, we are facing a very strong imperative to phase out this material. So why do we need it? What we know is that our members are systematically reporting the lack of credible, sustainable, scalable, cost-efficient alternative. And I'm going to continue with the example of John. Paper cup, or mostly made out of paper. That's what you can see for coffee in most of the flights today. What you probably know also is that inside you have a plastic film. If you don't have this film, you pour hot coffee in it, and the cup will not retain it. Now, it's a difficult thing, the hot liquids. We can replace this cup with ceramic or glass today, but that would be heavier. It means that aircraft will carry more weight. it will consume more fuel and ultimately emit more CO2 emissions. So not good for the environment at all. There's a second set of reasons why we continue to use single-use plastics during the in-flight experience. It is related to safety, security, and hygiene constraints. So if you remember, during the COVID-19 pandemic, plastic gloves on airline staff, masks, plastic lids over the meal portions, and so on, it's because plastic is very efficient for preventing the spread of the virus. Now, we know that 27 of our members started to phase out single-use plastic before the pandemic, and then they had to slow down or stop because of the pandemic restrictions. There's also one element that you need to keep in mind. John touched on that. So today, there's currently very low risk of single-use plastic leakage into the environment. So my cup would very likely not finish in the ocean. And that is because of the very stringent waste regulations that basically it will be incinerated or landfill buried. Now, in future, we'll need more recycling, but the fact is it's not currently in the ocean, mostly. Now, why do we need to phase out single-use plastic in this case? Well, the inappropriate disposal of single-use plastic is a huge humanitarian issue today. It impacts marine systems, it impacts human health, and so on. So as a result, what we're seeing is increasing national single-use plastic regulations. And also at international level, we see the negotiation that started this year of a UN Global Plastic Treaty. So the regulatory landscape, it's constantly changing, and we as airlines, we are facing that. We also see pressure from passengers because single-use plastic products are very visible during the in-flight experience. We did a survey in 11 countries, representative of the world. 78% of the respondents said that they are concerned or very concerned about use of single-use plastic in airline cabins. So airlines are committed to phase it out. We know that it is important. We have another big challenge to face. And this is linked to asymmetric, constantly changing single-use plastic regulations. Today, we have countries that doesn't have single-use plastic regulations, others that are developing, others that have, airports that have, but then from one country to another, even the definition of single-use plastic can be very different. So my cup, if I travel from Argentina to France, there's no regulation in Argentina that says that this is single-use plastic. When I land in Paris, that would be single-use plastic. That creates a huge challenge for airlines because they need to think of different products on different legs of the journey, which is costly, and it's also not good from the perspective of more waste. It also makes it very difficult to actually have a sustainable long-term plan to phase out single-use plastic. What is the solution then? So as IATA, what we see is two main things. We absolutely need the application of uniform rules across countries regarding single-use plastic. And then what we need is also access and understanding of sustainable alternatives to single-use plastic that are feasible, applicable for airlines. In order to do that, we need more engagement from policymakers, regulators. IATA is working in this direction. We have published a harmonized guidance for regulators on single-use plastic. We are also participating in the discussions on the UNEP Plastic Treaty. In the same time, we work with suppliers. So for instance, International Flight Services Association, Airline Catering Association are part of our interlocutors because we need to make sure they understand constraints and needs of airlines. And last but not least, it's about capacity building with airlines. And we also work on guidance, working group, and so on. So maybe one message to retain, we are really committed to phase out single-use plastic, but we need support from different stakeholders we have. Thank you.
Thanks, Olga. So, yeah, just finally, so you can see that we are trying to do the right thing, but the regulations are really hampering us at the moment. So, we can't contribute to the circular economy. We can't, for example, there's an SDG goal of reducing food waste by 50%, 12.3. We can't contribute to that at the moment. If we don't see a risk-based approach to animal health controls, we're going to see volumes continue to increase. We'll go in the opposite direction. And clearly with the UNEP Plastic Treaty, we have the opportunity, and we are the only sector in the world that is impacted by having different regulations in different parts of the world in almost real time. So it's key to us that we carry on their work within the Plastic Treaty to ensure that our, and probably international shipping as well, our concerns are reflected in that. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Quentin. And now we have time for a few questions before we break for lunch. So there's, see one question here.
Hi, I'm Sally Gethin, and I've got a long history of covering the cabin in terms of technology and development, and it's very refreshing to hear a conversation about other aspects besides, the fittings in the cabin and making a lot of money through ancillary revenues and so forth. I just want to take it away slightly, though, from the waste that you mentioned, because in the cabin, in the galley, there's a lot of energy consumed. For example, heating hot water for people's drinks, for example, the beverages. And also in the lavatories, a lot of water has to be consumed for that. In addition, you've got the APUs or the GPUs supplying air into the cabin, the idling of the aircraft often, that's been brought into question. So I think it's wonderful that you're focusing on SUP. It sounds like an almost insurmountable dilemma from the way it's been presented, but how about other more manageable ways to actually minimize, to make the cabin more sustainable and the activities that take place there? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that one. So the way that we've actually extended the scope of our single-use plastic working group into the sustainable cabin, exactly to take on board those kind of aspects. Because when we look, and we've had conversations with the OEMs about the cabin of the future, so just strange things like, why do we not have air blade technology, hand dryers in washrooms when we've got bleed air very close by? I've talked to the likes of Dyson who say, well, yes, we put them in cruise liners and we put them in railways and trains, but why not in aviation? So I think this is a really interesting aspect that we need to start delving into. Where we're getting our water from, what is the limit on the in-flight entertainment systems in terms of their energy consumption? Are we beginning to think about these issues? Because it's coming off the main engine, so it does impact fuel efficiency. So yeah, I totally agree. And there's a numerous air, ventilation, water, even where, for example, the tanks that are sized in aircraft are principally from a World Health Organization report from 1977, while passengers were potentially drinking water from the tap at that stage. Very few passengers are doing that now. So why do we still have tanks that are spec'd from 1977? So yeah, really interesting aspects, and we want to definitely work with the industry to drive some of those forwards, those initiatives forward. Thanks.
Thank you. We have a question over there, Martin. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Helen Massey-Beresford from Aviation Week. Just a quick question. You mentioned the fact that it's hard to find alternatives to plastics in the cabin. Are companies working on these sorts of things, and is there a way you can encourage them to come up with new technologies that can replace plastics?
Yeah, I mean, as Olga pointed out, we've already seen instances now where airlines have bought alternatives which do not fit in all markets, and that's clearly a problem. And you've probably all seen this as you flew in this week. You'll have seen the turtle logo and the label that's applied to European products, not applicable anywhere else. So the main challenge that we face is that we do not want to run into the situation that we were foreseeing with SAF, in that what is the sustainability credentials of the alternatives? So in terms of, first of all, integrity, as Olga pointed out, does it hold water? Does it leach? And then where was the paper and the cardboard and the fiber from in the first place? If we're looking at bamboo, are we going to see rainforests chopped in order to have that product? So it was brilliant to see. I went to in June, I went to a cabin expo, catering expo, and there was many, many new products. But when you asked about the sustainability credentials, there was nothing. So we've really got to get some form of certification standardization so that airlines know, first of all, where the product's coming from, but also the life cycle. What is the actual weight of this product? Has it got plastics in it? You know, in the European context, bioplastics are still classified as single-use plastics. So yes, standardization, but bearing in mind one thing, we are not alone here. You know, we are a minor player in the overall single-use plastic replacement dilemma. You know, we've got to be looking to the big retail players, the Starbucks and the McDonald's, who are driving through the change and maintain contact with them in order to ensure that we have appropriate sustainability embedded into the new products. Thanks.
And maybe to add, there are currently a lot of announcements of startups developing sustainable alternatives. Now, the challenge is that these are not yet completely scalable, and John can bring some details. And it's something to have a test prototype and something else to actually have it scaled across an airline or several airlines.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? Yes, we have one at the back. Marcin, all the way back.
Hi, Joanna Bailey, Simple Flying. Question for John. If, and I know it's a big if, the rules around food waste are changed, what then is the pathway for airlines to deal with this $4 billion worth of untouched food and drink? And in your opinion, what is the chance of getting that regulation changed at any point in the near future? Thank you.
Fantastic question. The real solution, so that $4 billion, majority of it would disappear. So we would be able to donate that food that we currently can't do. We'll be able to biotreat. So if we can imagine the future in which, you know, when we look at life cycle, a single use is, in terms of emissions, the best option. If we're moving away from plastic and we're going to bio-based, we can imagine a situation where an unregulated market would allow us to biotreat the paper, the cup, the crockery, the glass, the meal, and also not distinguish it, keep it separate from the airport and from the actual catering manufacturer, the caterers in the first place. So we could see this as an energy resource, you know, for biogas or composting. So yeah, I think it would be an amazing future. And the possibility is getting stronger every day because slowly but surely we're beginning to find out that the regulator has no evidence. And once that's completely exposed, I think then we can move ahead with a review of that legislation. Thanks.
Thank you.